Okay, so the video randomly stopped for some reason. I'm gonna keep on trucking. When I left off, we were talking about three things that Lakoff meant by the Enlightenment mindset. Okay, one is that we are rational. Two is that we weigh the evidence and base our conclusions about the evidence on rationality. So, if we're considering whether to go out on a Friday night, we will make a list of all the reasons why we should, all the reasons why we shouldn't. And we will look at those lists, evaluate the strength of each reason, and come to a conclusion based on, I don't know, our best interest or something like that. But the point is, we think about all the concerns, we weigh the evidence, and then we make a correct choice. Okay? That's number two. Number three, which is very important, he says that because reason is universal, we're all rational people, and because the facts are the facts and they don't change, right? Facts are just facts. We end up all agreeing on conclusions for many, many things. Okay, rationality is universal for each person, meaning that each person sees the facts the same way and draws the same interpretations about those facts the same way. So we're all rational. We all see facts the same way. We all make conclusions the same way, and we all should end up reaching the same conclusions on a lot of phenomena. Okay. He could be talking directly to a lot of social scientists. It's like he could be attacking the entire premise of this course, you might think. All right. People like me, to a greater or lesser extent, we believe in the facts. All right. We believe that we can find the facts about social life. We can believe that we find answers to really big questions. Questions about what should the right foreign aid to Africa be? Who should we elect for the next president? Okay, we believe that data can help answer those questions. We believe that once we come up with the answer to the questions of weighing the facts, finding the facts out, coming to our conclusions, we believe that our stuff is somewhat universal and that people should, would do very well to listen to us. That they should listen to us when we say that we have some facts and some conclusions based on the facts that are going to help inform our policy or our understanding of social life. Someone in the social science might absolutely believe that we can figure out facts that we could all agree upon, and that once we weigh all those facts, we could come together on policy solutions because those facts would suggest a course for action. So ISIS, right? A social scientist might say that there is a set of facts that we should all be able to agree on that about ISIS that sort of lends itself to certain conclusions about how we should deal with ISIS. All right? If all of that sounds very rational, if all of that sounds like the Enlightenment mindset, that's because it is. Social science and the scientific method sprung out of the age of Enlightenment, 18th century Europe. All right? The modern social science can trace its roots very, very clearly back there. All right? Lakoff says, wait a minute, it's not that easy. And it's not that easy because of how our brain works. All right? If I had to sum up Lakoff's most important finding, I would say that his main idea is that there is so much about our thinking that is not conscious. He says that brain research shows that 98% of our thinking is subconscious, is reflective. We can't control it. Most of the time, we don't even know that it's going on. It's happening at a truly subconscious level. We are not conscious of it. We don't even know that it's happening. All right? So, if the brain doesn't work the way the Enlightenment suggests that it does, which is where we weigh facts rationally and come to rational conclusions, how does the brain actually work? What does that mean for the study of politics and of social life more generally? Okay? Here is where Lakoff introduces his notion of frames. Okay, now I should say he has a distinction in there which is very important for psychological research between frames and narratives and a couple other terms. I tend to use them pretty interchangeably. I apologize if that causes any confusion. I don't care that you know the specifically what a frame is versus what a narrative is, according to his definition. I care very much that you get the general story of Lakoff. And so let's talk about frames. Let's talk about narratives, okay? Frames and narratives are the idea that we have pre-existing stories in our heads that we use to interpret what we see in the world, okay? Now, an example of a frame. I love his rescue narrative, all right? And in fact, I tend to see my life through the rescue narrative a lot, but that's getting ahead of ourselves, all right? Rescue narrative. There is a hero, and he is the good guy, okay? The villain is the bad guy. The villain does something nasty, and the hero rides in, defeats the villain, and if there's a victim, saves the victim, okay? That's an incredibly basic story. But if you just think about how many of our movies, how many of our TV shows, how many of our plays and stuff like that, really, when you take out all the bells and whistles and the frills, a lot of our stories reduce down to this rescue narrative, all right? This basic conflict between hero and villain, and the hero thwarting the villain. And Lakoff would say that there's something about this story that is either innate or very primal to us, okay? That this story resonates with us and structures the way that we think about life, okay? What's an example I could use here? Well, I will tell you, leading up to the 2008 election, there was a big rescue narrative surrounding Barack Obama within the American left, right? The villain was George Bush. According to the American left, George Bush took us into 2 wars we didn't need to be into. He ran up this huge deficit. He destroyed civil liberties in this country. He was this guy who, according to the American left, was destroying America. Now, a rational person might say, oh, that sounds a little hyperbolic. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration. Like, can George Bush really destroy America? But, like, those were the terms that liberals thought of. Liberals like me thought of George Bush when they looked at. George Bush was a villain doing dastardly deeds. And in comes Barack Obama to save us. He's a hero who comes in to save us. He's everything that George Bush isn't. He thwarts George Bush, and he's going to reverse all of his policies. That's the hero narrative, all right? And Lakoff would say that the hero narrative and and narratives like that are fundamental to the way that we think about everything. That everything we run, everything we think about on a conscious level is filtered through these narratives, okay? Critical points to emphasize about narratives. Everyone becomes a role in a narrative. We don't see who they are. We see them as our role for them dictates. And we see them as a character. We assume that their motivations, their worldviews, everything about them is consistent with what the frame says that the character in the narrative should do. All right? He uses the example of Anna Nicole Smith. And this is a fun example that I think greatly illustrates his point. And I don't know that anyone can explain how Anna Nicole Smith supports his point as well as Lakoff does, which is probably appropriate. You should be able to make your own point the best. But I'll do what I can here, all right? Usually students still remember Anna Nicole Smith, but quick catch-up is that she was a blonde woman who was most known as sort of a very buxom former playmate, and known also for sort of, after being a playmate, marrying a much older man. The older man passed away. There was a fight between the older man's children and Anna Nicole Smith for control of that man's estate. She later went on to star on reality TV shows, and then she died tragically. And Lakoff's point is that how you interpreted Anna Nicole Smith's death has to do with which narrative you subconsciously attributed to her. Okay? What are we talking about? The gold digger. If you had a bad opinion of Anna Nicole Smith, all right, one of the frames that got applied to her and that structured people's thinking was that she was a gold digger, all right? And we all know the gold digger frame. I say those words and you probably already know what it is. But it is the woman who goes after a man for no other reason than she sees a paycheck. She sees her ticket to wealth. And so she doesn't care about the man. She is unscrupulous in her ability, in sort of her willingness and ability to manipulate emotions. And she will do whatever she wants, whatever she can, to get that paycheck in the form of a man to take care of her. Okay? Now, that's one frame, that's one narrative that people use to interpret Anna Nicole Smith's death. There are a bunch of others. One of those that he talks about in depth is the woman's lot. The woman's lot is the idea that women live in a male-dominated world and that sometimes they have to do things that are suboptimal, that are not the greatest, in order to survive. Now, if you were this type of person, if you regarded Anna Nicole Smith as, through the woman's lot narrative, you're going to look at her a whole lot differently than you will look at her if you had the gold digger narrative. Women's lot narratives may say, look, Anna Nicole Smith was born very poor. She had children. She had to take care of her children. And so at that point, she worked with what she had to get what she could to take care of herself. And that, sort of implicit in the women's lot narrative is that there was no problem with what Anna Nicole Smith did necessarily. What was the problem was a society and the norms that sort of structure the world around her, so that she really had no choice but to do some of the less savory things that she did. Be a stripper, be in Playboy. That she felt like she had no choice if she wanted to provide for her family. And that if she was a quote-unquote gold digger, if she did marry for money, who can necessarily blame a woman for doing that when so many, what we might think of as more legitimate options to come up, are closed off to her? All right. Other narratives Lakoff discusses that apply to Anna Nicole Smith: rags to riches, American redemption, reinvention, girl with pluck, calculating bitch is one of them, troubled life. All right. Usually, if I'm in class, this is the point at which I ask you guys which one of these frames is right. And the question is designed to be ridiculous. There is no right frame here, okay? There is no way that sort of we can use the Enlightenment mindset to debate all the evidence and look at and figure out objectively which of these frames, which of these narratives best fits Anna Nicole Smith. That's an impossible process, right? One, you have very little control over what narrative you apply to someone, okay? So, I look at you guys, and I immediately think of you guys first as students, all right? Students has a whole set of expectations in my head. Professor and student relationship structures a lot of how I interact with you guys, what I think about you guys. Does that contain the truth of all that you are? No, and I know that. And yet still, when I think of each of you guys, I will think of you guys as students. And I will treat you as students and not as people from Virginia, and not as generic people between the ages of 18 and 21, and not completely as individuals, right? That something about the narrative that I apply to you guys will always structure our interactions and my thinking about you based on the student-professor narrative, okay? And I had no choice over that. That's just the way that the brain works. The brain, immediately when they get new information, according to Lakoff and according to this brain research, makes its choice. It gets new information and it applies a narrative, and that information affects thinking only insofar as the narrative allows it to be interpreted. Okay? More examples, okay? More contemporary examples. Barack Obama, okay? One of the side articles that I had you read today details the overwhelming evidence that Barack Obama is not a foreigner. He's an American citizen, right? He's released his birth certificate several times. And yet there's about 15 to 20% of the American public at any given time who persist in thinking that Barack Obama is not an American citizen. He could not have done any more to prove, he cannot do any more to prove that he is an American citizen. There is no rational reason to conclude that he is not an American citizen. So why does 20% of the public still think that he is? Because of the narrative that they've applied to him. I would argue that there are certain people out there who, when they look at Barack Obama, they think foreigner, they think other, they think not like me, outsider. All of these are sort of synonyms for the same type of phenomenon. And once they've made that decision that he is a foreigner, information that will disprove that narrative, disprove that frame, is very, very difficult for them to process. They're more likely to ignore it. All right. Lest you think that this is just something that happens to conservatives or to more educated people, all right? It is happening to you right now in ways that you can think about, and it happens to me. I already described how it structures our relationship, but let's talk about Obama, all right? Political science, supposed to be my ballywick, my thing that I study. I'm supposed to provide just the facts. It's central to my personality that I can provide a reasonably objective view of political life. Okay? It's one of the things that I like best about myself, that I am a social scientist. I identify with this. Okay? Yet I'm also a liberal. I'm also an Obama supporter. All right? When I read a study that supports the idea that Obamacare has covered more people, and it's done so at no great increase in cost, and it's resulted in no loss of coverage, all right? That sticks in my head. When I see a study that says the opposite, I'm either going to disagree with it and try to find fault with how it was put together, or more likely, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to dismiss it. And there could be 10 studies that say that Obama's healthcare plan is failing. Those 10, I am more likely to forget and remember the one that backs up the narrative that I have in my place, in my head, that I have in place in my head, that backs up what I want to think. All right? When Obamacare was under debate, the Congressional Budget Office, which is generally considered as unbiased a research organization as exists in the United States, It has to provide information to both Democrats and Republicans, and it's considered the gold standard of what is unbiased. They came up with an estimate while Obamacare was being debated, coming into law, that said it was going to add $200 billion to the deficit. And my initial reaction was, well, fuck that. All right, forget that. Sorry, cursing. That can't possibly be right. They have to be wrong. Okay? Now, because I'm a social scientist and because I know this stuff about Lakoff's brain research, I can stop myself, and I do, right? I stop myself and ask myself, all right, am I being really fair to the evidence? Am I really paying attention to both sides when I think that the empirical evidence says that Obamacare thus far has been a success? All right? I hope I'm fair to that and that I can draw conclusions that run counter to sort of what the narratives are in my head. But I can't deny that my initial reaction is I like stuff that agrees with me. I dislike stuff that disagrees with me. I am more likely to remember stuff that supports my predispositions. I am less likely to remember facts that dissuade or that go against my thoughts, my beliefs, and stuff like that. All right? Absolutely. Me, PhD trained social scientist, I am totally subject. I totally see the world in these Lakoffian terms. All right? I totally apply narratives. I would like to think, never mind, I'll skip that. Okay? So let's review the general stuff about Lakoff here. Okay? According to Lakoff, you don't choose which narratives or frames you use to structure your thinking. Okay? I didn't pick my politics. My politics, my belief as a liberal, my desire to be a liberal, is not based on, I went out, I looked at the facts of the world, I'd say, these facts seem to support me being a Democrat rather than a Republican. I've long since come to terms with the fact that one of the main reasons that I'm a Democrat is because my father was a Republican. And I don't want to be, I love my dad. My dad and I are great, but I want to be my own man. So I'm going to be a Democrat, all right? That is not a rational reason to pick a political party. And yet here I am, a Democrat. And I'm a Democrat for other reasons, but that is one of the reasons. Because I had a narrative in my head that I didn't choose, but I looked at the choice of politics as something like the choice, as through the framework of, well, how do I distinguish myself from my father? Okay? Second thing. So the first thing is you don't choose the narratives that you believe. Your brain makes that decision the immediate second, the split second you encounter a new phenomenon, and you classify it in your head, all right, subconsciously, and the narrative is in place, all right? Second, when you first experience a phenomenon, as we said, your brain wants to make sense of it, so it applies the narrative. The second thing is that once you had settled on a narrative, that narrative will structure your thinking about the phenomenon under consideration, and it is very hard to change that narrative. Okay? The evidence suggests, all but proves, that Barack Obama is an American citizen. That does not dissuade 20% of the people from thinking he's a foreigner. The evidence suggests that the Congressional Budget Office is a unbiased research arm, and that the evidence suggested at that time that Obamacare would add a $200 billion cost to the United States. Okay? My immediate reaction was to try to throw that evidence out, okay? Rather than change my belief, rather than change the narrative in my head, okay? Ultimately, what you do is you seek out evidence, you seek out facts that confirm your biases, that confirm your predispositions, and you will not hear, you will not retain, you literally will not be able to process information that goes against the narratives that are in your head. Okay? In other words, most of us want to cherry pick evidence. Our brains are hardwired to cherry pick evidence. I am hardwired to seek out evidence that Obama is a great president. Conservatives are hardwired because of the narratives that they have applied to seek out evidence that Obama is a foreigner or the worst president ever or something like that. Okay? The main implication of Lakoff for our understanding of politics is that our brains are not hardwired for the types of tasks that this class covers. We're really bad about evidence, okay? We don't base our conclusions on evidence. We don't even want to see evidence naturally in our heads that goes against the prevailing narratives that we have. All right? I want you to believe that the research that I do is unbiased. More than that, I want you to believe that there is research, that it is possible to have unbiased research, that it's possible to have a set of facts that are not susceptible to, oh, this is one person's interpretation and this is the other. No, that there's just facts, all right? I actually do believe in that to a certain extent, all right? But who's creating the facts? The social scientist is creating the facts, okay? I'm the one, when I go out and do research, I'm doing the research. I'm making different choices about, oh, I think this matters but not that. You know, oh, I think this is an important research topic. I think that is not an important research topic. I am making these decisions about what counts as facts and what counts as research and things like that. And I am an inherently flawed, from a rational point of view, instrument. I am not rational. I'm Lakoff like everybody else. So the people generating the facts are subject to these Lakoffian concerns, all right? This idea about frames and narratives. And it may, if we're not careful, compromise our ability to be good researchers. And then second, and maybe even a bigger problem, even if I could come up with a completely unbiased set of facts, are people going to hear it? Or are only people who agree with the conclusions from the research, are they the only ones who are going to hear it? And the people who disagree with my conclusions, are they just going to go off and find another set of facts to pay attention to? Okay? So 2 problems from Lakoff for the social sciences. One is that can we ever construct unbiased research that is not sort of derailed by our ability, by sort of the way that our brains work? And 2, even if we can, is anybody going to hear it, or are people just going to go for the facts that support support what they believe? All right. I will pick up with that question in the next video. Yeah, and I'll leave you with that. And yeah, take it easy. Have a good weekend.